I thought I was the kind of man who didn't miss much. 67 years of living will do that to you. You learn to read a room. You learn to read people. My late wife used to say I had a gift for it. She'd laugh and call me her human lie detector. I miss her saying that. I miss a lot of things she used to say. Her name was Annette. She passed 3 years ago, February, while the ground was still frozen and the dogwood in the backyard hadn't come back yet. Breast cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and she was graceful about every single day of it. More graceful than I was. I cried more than she did, and she was the one dying. After she was gone, I rattled around at our house in Greensboro, North Carolina for about 8 months before I figured out how to be alone again. Our daughter Celeste, she's 34, married, 2 kids, wanted me to sell the place and move closer to her out in Cary. I told her no. I told her this house has 31 years of her mother in it, and I'm not ready to let that go. She understood, eventually. My son-in-law's name is Wendell. He's a project manager at a tech firm in the Research Triangle. Good income, nice car, always dressed like he just stepped out of a catalog. He and Celeste had been together since college, and I'd never had a real reason not to trust him. He was polite. He remembered my birthday. He called me by my first name, Lawrence, which I'd told him was fine. I want to be careful how I tell this because when I look back now, the signs were there. I just didn't see them as signs. I saw them as kindness. It started the Christmas before last. Annette had been gone almost 2 years, and I was managing, but Celeste worried about me constantly. She'd call 3-4 times a week. Was I eating? Was I going to the doctor? Was I being careful with the doors locked at night? I told her I was fine. I told her I'd been taking care of myself since long before she was born. But she worried anyway. That's who she is. That Christmas, Wendell pulled me aside after dinner. The kids, my grandkids, Petra and little James, were in the other room watching something loud on television. Celeste was in the kitchen, and Wendell sat down across from me at the dining room table with what I can only describe as a very prepared expression. He said he'd been thinking about my safety. He said he knew how much I valued my independence, and he wasn't trying to step on that. But he'd been reading about seniors living alone. I noticed he said seniors, and about how home security had gotten so good in the last few years, and so affordable, and he wanted to do something meaningful for me. Something that would give Celeste peace of mind, he said, but also give me peace of mind. He had a box with him. He'd brought it in from the car while I was helping Petra with her coat. It was a home security system. Full package. A hub, 3 indoor cameras, 2 outdoor cameras, a doorbell camera, motion sensors, and a tablet mounted in the kitchen so you could see everything in one place. Professional grade, he said. The kind of thing that normally ran close to $800, but he'd gotten it on a deal through his work. I'll admit, I was touched. I really was. I shook his hand. I told him that was one of the most thoughtful things anyone had done for me since Annette passed. He smiled, and it was a good smile, and I remember thinking that Celeste had married a solid man. He came back the second weekend in January and spent most of a Saturday setting the whole thing up. I made coffee. He showed me everything. The app on my phone, how to check the cameras, how the motion alerts worked, how to review footage from the past 7 days. He walked me through it twice. Patient. Thorough. You've got full control, he told me before he left. It's all yours. I believed him. For about 6 weeks, I thought it was the best thing in the house. I checked the front door camera every morning like it was the weather report. The outdoor cameras caught a raccoon knocking over my trash can 2 nights in a row, and I felt almost embarrassed by how satisfying it was to finally have proof of that. My neighbor Paulette thought it was funny. I showed her the footage and she laughed until her eyes watered. Paulette has lived next door to me for 11 years. Her husband, Gene, passed a few months before Annette, and we'd fallen into the habit of checking on each other the way people do when they're both missing someone in the same quiet way. She'd bring over sweet potato pie. I'd clear her driveway after a heavy snow without being asked. That kind of thing. It was Paulette who first said something, though she didn't mean it as a warning at the time. She'd come over on a Tuesday afternoon in late February. We were sitting in the living room with the TV on low, and she pointed at one of the indoor cameras mounted near the hallway and said, "You know, something about that thing always watching makes me feel strange. Like being in a store." I laughed it off. I told her it was just for safety. But the thing is, her saying that planted something small in the back of my mind. Not a suspicion, just a question. A very quiet question that I mostly ignored. The question got louder the first weekend of March when my old friend Harlan came to visit. Now let me tell you about Harlan. We went to high school together in Winston-Salem, went our separate ways after graduation. He joined the army. I went to work for the railroad. Eventually got into facilities management. But we'd stayed close in that way some old friendships do, where you can go 4 months without talking and pick right back up like no time passed. Harlan spent 22 years in the service, did 2 tours overseas, worked in logistics and communications. When he got out, he spent another decade doing security consulting for a property management company up in Virginia. The man knows systems. He knows how things are put together, and more importantly, he knows how things can be taken apart. He'd come down for the weekend because we'd been planning a trip. Just 2 old men thinking about driving up to Shenandoah in the spring, the way Annette and I used to do. We were going to work out the dates, maybe look at some maps. We were eating dinner the first night, and Harlan got up to put his plate in the sink and stopped in the hallway. Just stopped. He stood there for a moment looking at the camera mounted in the corner near the coat closet. Then he looked at the one near the kitchen. Then he walked into the living room and looked at the one facing the couch. He came back to the table and sat down and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Lawrence, who set this system up?" I told him Wendell had set it up back in January. He said, "Did you create the account yourself? Your email address, your password?" I thought about it. I hadn't. Wendell had set everything up on his phone first and then logged me in on the tablet and on my phone. I told Harlan that. He was quiet again. He asked if he could look at the tablet. I got it from the kitchen and handed it to him. He spent about 10 minutes going through things I couldn't fully follow, settings menus, account pages, things I'd never looked at because the main camera screens were all I needed. Then he set the tablet down on the table and looked at me in a way that I can only describe as careful. The way a doctor looks at you before he says something you need to sit down for. He said, "Do you know what administrator access means?" I said I had a general idea. He said that on this system, the administrator is the person who owns the account, the primary account holder. They can see everything the cameras see. They can pull footage. They can get notifications about motion and activity. They can also see the access logs, meaning every time someone opens the app, every time the cameras are checked. And then he said, "Lawrence, you're not the administrator on this account. Wendell is." I heard the words. I understood them individually. But for a few seconds they didn't quite arrange themselves into meaning. I said, "What does that mean exactly?" He said it meant that Wendell could see every camera in my home from his phone at any time from anywhere. He could see when I woke up in the morning. He could see when I left the house. He could see who came to visit, how long they stayed, what rooms I went in and out of. He'd been able to see all of that since January. I sat back in my chair. I thought about the past 6 weeks. All the ordinary mornings I'd spent in my own kitchen not knowing I was being watched. The afternoon Paulette had come over and we'd sat in the living room talking about Jean. The evening my financial advisor, a man named Richard, had stopped by to drop off some paperwork. I'd had him sit at the kitchen table. We'd talked for 40 minutes about my accounts, my pension, the house. Annette and I had bought this house in 1993. It was paid off. It was worth, according to what the neighbors had gotten for their place 2 years ago, somewhere close to $340,000. I also had Annette's life insurance, a pension from 30 years with the railroad, and an IRA that we'd been putting money into since our 40s. I was not a wealthy man by any measure, but I was a comfortable one, and everything, the will, the accounts, the house, was something Celeste stood to inherit one day. And Celeste was married to Wendell. I want to say I got angry right then. I want to say I stood up and threw something. But that's not what happened. What happened was that a very cold, very clear feeling settled over me, the way cold air settles into a low place, and I sat very still in it. Harlan watched me. After a while I said, "What would you do?" He said, "I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't let on that you know." He said if I changed the account or removed the cameras, Wendell would know immediately. And if something was happening, if Wendell was building some kind of picture of my daily life, my habits, my visitors, my state of mind, then tipping him off would only give him time to cover his tracks. He said, "You act normal, and you figure out what he's actually looking for." That night, after Harlan went to bed, I sat in the dark living room for a long time. The camera in the corner was a small thing, a little black lens, a tiny indicator light. It had been there for 6 weeks. I'd walked past it 100 times. I thought about the visit from Richard, my financial advisor. I thought about how I'd mentioned casually that I was thinking about updating my will. I thought about Wendell's questions over the past year or so, questions I'd taken as interest, as a son-in-law learning more about the family. What was the house worth now, in your opinion? Have you thought about long-term care insurance? Does Celeste know where all the important documents are kept? I thought about all of it differently now. I decided to be patient. It goes against my nature. I'm not a patient man by temperament, though I've learned to fake it over the years. But I decided that the best thing I could do was give Wendell nothing to work with while I figured out what he was actually doing. So for the next 3 weeks, I was an old man going about his ordinary life. I went to the grocery store. I watched baseball. I called Celeste on Sunday afternoons and talked about the grandkids the way I always did. When Wendell was around, I was warm. I asked about his work. I offered him coffee. But I also called Richard and told him not to come by the house for a while. We'd meet at his office instead. I went through my files in the study and moved everything important, the will, the account statements, the deed to the house, into a safety deposit box at the bank, and Harlan, back up in Virginia, started doing some quiet looking around. What he found took about 2 weeks. He called me on a Thursday evening and told me he'd been talking to a contact who did digital forensics. The contact had looked at some things Harlan described, the account setup, the access pattern, the timing, and had some questions. Was there any reason the account would have been accessing footage at unusual hours? Late nights, early mornings? I said I didn't know. I went to bed around 10:30 most nights. Harlan said the access logs showed someone checking the cameras between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. on at least a dozen occasions over 6 weeks. Not motion alerts. Active check-ins. Someone opening the app and watching. I sat down on the edge of my bed. He also said his contact had found that the account had an archived folder that wasn't visible on the basic tablet interface. You had to know where to look. The folder contained footage clips, not just the automatic 7-day rolling archive, but manually saved clips. Selected. Organized. He asked me if I wanted to know what was in the folder. I said yes. It was what I had feared and somehow known since the night Harlan first showed me the account screen. There were clips of Richard's visit. There were clips of me on the phone. At least 3 separate phone calls that had taken place in the living room within camera view, including one where I'd been talking to the attorney who drew up my will. There were clips from the mornings when I'd sat at the kitchen table with papers spread out, going through bank statements the way I do every first of the month. Whoever had been watching wasn't watching for my safety. They were watching to understand my assets. I didn't call Celeste right away. I want to be honest about that. I sat on this for 4 days because I didn't know how to hand my daughter something that was going to break her heart, and I kept hoping, in the part of me that is still her father first, that there was some other explanation, that I was wrong. That Harlan's contact was wrong, that Wendell had some reason for all of this that I just wasn't seeing. I didn't call Celeste right away. But on the 5th day, I called a private investigator out of Durham named Hargrove that Harlan had recommended. I told him what I had. He told me what he needed. And then things moved. Hargrove spent 3 weeks talking to people. He talked to the title company that had appraised the house. He talked to a paralegal who happened to know of a law firm that had received an inquiry, not filed anything, just an inquiry, about the process of establishing guardianship over an elderly parent with diminishing cognitive capacity. That phrase, diminishing cognitive capacity. I've been sharpest in my life. I have all my words. I know what day it is. I balance my own checkbook without a calculator. But someone had been watching me for 6 weeks, collecting footage, and had called a law firm to ask about guardianship. Hargrove laid it all out in a folder. Printed pages, timestamps, contact records. He handed it to me in his office in Durham, and I drove home and sat in the driveway for about 20 minutes before I went inside. Then I called Celeste. She drove down the next morning without Wendell. She didn't tell him where she was going, just said she needed to see me. She came in and I made coffee and I put Hargrove's folder on the kitchen table between us, and I said, "I need you to read this. All of it. And then we'll talk." I watched her read. I'd been a father for 34 years, and there is no description I can give you for watching your child's face change while they understand something they were not prepared to understand. It took her about 20 minutes. She didn't make a sound. When she finished, she closed the folder and put both hands flat on the table and stared at the wood grain for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, "Daddy, I didn't know." I told her I knew she didn't. She said, "He was asking me questions about the estate, about what would happen to the house if you ever needed full-time care." She stopped. I thought he was being responsible. I told her a lot of things, looked like responsibility from the outside. The cameras came down that same afternoon. Harlan drove down and removed every single one, and I stood in my hallway and watched him do it and felt something I don't have a clean word for. Not relief exactly, more like the feeling of a window being opened in a room that has been closed too long. What happened with Wendell and Celeste is their story to tell, not mine. I'll only say that she is a strong woman and she did not make any fast decisions, and I respect her for that. I'll say that Hargrove's folder went to an attorney, and that attorney made certain that the inquiry to that law firm about guardianship went no further. I'll say that the system Wendell installed in my house cost him a great deal more than $800. Paulette brought over sweet potato pie the week after the cameras came down. She didn't know the full story, just that I'd had a hard few weeks and was doing better. We sat in the living room. The same living room, the same couch, just without the small black lens in the corner. And we talked about Jean and Annette the way we sometimes do, the way you talk about people you still miss. And it was just an afternoon between 2 old friends and nobody was watching and nobody was building a case, and there was no folder being filled. I keep the heat exactly where I want it now. I go to bed when I want. I sit in the kitchen in the morning with my coffee and my papers, and I am accountable to no one. And every morning that feels like something worth noticing. Most mornings I do notice it. There's something I've been turning over in my mind since all of this happened. and I want to say it plainly because I think it matters. There is a difference between how someone who loves you pays attention to you and how someone who is building a case pays attention to you. Love is distracted. Love forgets sometimes. Love asks how you're doing and sometimes doesn't wait for the whole answer because it's busy or tired or thinking about something else. That's not a flaw. That's what real life looks like. But someone building a case is never distracted. They remember everything. They ask the right questions. They're patient. They come back. They're so thorough that you might mistake it for devotion. If someone in your life is paying that kind of attention to your finances, your documents, your routines, your health, if the attention feels less like warmth and more like inventory, trust that feeling, even if you can't name it yet. Even if you can't name it yet, even if you keep telling yourself you're wrong. I was the careful one, and I still almost missed it. Trust the feeling. I've been sitting with this for a while now, trying to figure out what the whole thing actually taught me. Not the legal part, not the part about administrator access or archived folders or what a private investigator charges by the week, the part underneath all of that. What I keep coming back to is this. Wendell didn't fail because he was stupid. He failed because he thought I was. That's the thing about people who set traps. They have to believe, somewhere deep down, that the person they're setting the trap for isn't paying attention. And for a little while, he was right about me. I wasn't paying attention in the right way. I was paying attention to the gesture, the box, the Saturday installation, the patient walkthrough, and I missed what was underneath the gesture. That's not stupidity on my part. That's just being human. We tend to believe the story that's being handed to us, especially when it comes wrapped in something that looks like care. What saved me wasn't suspicion. I want to be clear about that. What saved me was Harlan, a man who had spent decades learning to look past the surface of things, who had the kind of mind that asks, who has access to this, before he asks, isn't this nice? That's a different kind of intelligence than the kind that scores well on tests. It's the kind that comes from paying attention to how the world actually works, not how you hope it works. And it's the kind I should have had more of myself. But I also had to have the character to act on what I learned. And that part was harder than I expected. When Harlan showed me that screen, my first instinct wasn't to go confront Wendell. It wasn't even to protect myself. My first instinct was to find a reason it wasn't true, because Celeste loved him, because my grandkids called him Dad, because I had shaken his hand in my own dining room and felt good about it. Undoing all of that in one evening required something I can only call moral clarity, the willingness to see what is actually in front of you, even when it costs you something to look. And then there was the part that took the most out of me, the waiting. 3 weeks of being an ordinary old man in his ordinary house, walking past those cameras every day, making coffee, watching baseball, calling Celeste on Sunday, acting as though I knew nothing, while I quietly moved every important document out of that house. That kind of patience isn't passivity, it's discipline. It's the decision to be strategic instead of reactive, even when everything in you wants to react. Lawrence, Harlan, Celeste. Each of us had a role in how this ended. Harlan brought the knowledge. I brought the steadiness to use it carefully. And Celeste, when the time came, brought the courage to face something that would have broken a lesser person entirely. I still have the house. I still have the heat set exactly where I want it. And I know now, in a way I didn't fully know before, that the most important things you own are not your property or your accounts. They're your clarity, your character, and your willingness to protect both when someone tests them. The cameras are gone. The mornings are mine again.